In this video today, we're going to talk about the number one mistake I see most beginner watercolor artists make, where their paintings end up looking lifeless and flat like this painting here on the left, versus the beautiful watercolory magic here on the right. So let's talk about it. First, we're going to paint the pot that was on the left, and we'll talk about some of the mistakes. Then we'll paint the pot that was on the right, and I will tell you how to fix those mistakes and make watercolor turn into magic. When all beginners start painting, adults do this, kids do this, we see a brown pot that we want to paint, and so we pick up a brown color of paint, and then we take that paint and we fill in the space that is for the pot with the brown paint. It's kind of like we're coloring in a picture with crayon. This does not work very well with watercolor. We need to have contrast. And what does that mean, needing to have contrast? Well, if there is a shadow, which I'm going to place a shadow here on the left, then there needs to be a light source. But because the entire pot is one plain color and we didn't have a lighter area, we don't have a light source. And also our shadow is really flat because we've chosen the wrong color and we didn't really blend it in to look like it was part of the pot. It looks separate from the pot. So the number one mistake I see most beginner watercolor artists make is that we are not having our highlights and our shadows adequately represented. So we're going to go into more depth on how to achieve that when I paint the one on the right. But again, I'm doing that in the leaves. I'm painting them one flat color, and I'm starting with more of a middle value of green. I'm not starting with my lightest color that would be a highlight. I am starting way too far in the middle towards the darker end of the green spectrum. So while it looks green, I painted green leaves, it doesn't have that magical watercolor feel because there is no dimension and we can't see the flow of the light to the dark shadow. So even when I pick up a darker color of paint and try to mix it with my green and then tap in the shadows while everything is still wet, but they still fall flat because there's no dimension. We don't have our light, medium, and dark values visible, creating that magical watercolor look. So I'm going to show you that next on the right, but the last thing we're going to add to this painting is a very flat and shapeless shadow to complete this very shapeless and lifeless watercolor. All right, so going into the one where we're correcting it, remember the mistake is that we do not have the appropriate highlights and shadows. So the first thing we have to do is we need to add more water to our paint mixture. Also some yellow gold color, because brown is not the only color that we're going to see on this pot, especially in the highlighted areas. So the first layer that we put down of our watercolor pot should be very light, should be almost golden, because that would be kind of the sunny highlighted color that we would see on this brown pot. And we are leaving the right side where the sun or the light source is hitting the pot. We are leaving it completely blank. It's just the white of the paper. We're going to slightly fill that in as we go, but because there's a lot of texture on this pot, we don't need to fill it in all the way. We're going to move very quickly because we want nice blending and bleeding while our pot is still wet. So we're going to be adding more of that brown color that we used as the base color on the pot from the left. And we are just adding it to the more shadowy side of the pot, letting everything blend and bleed very naturally. I always keep a paper towel close by because I very often will rinse my brush to pick up more water, tap my brush to remove water, move the paint around until I like the way the edges look, I like the way the paint is mixing, and then I can go in and add more paint, add more details. But if you go in to move paint around but your brush is too wet, that's when you get that backflow bloom in your paintings. So anytime you go to move the paint around or add a new color, make sure your brush is relatively dry. It can be damp with pigment, but not with water, if that makes sense. So I'm just moving the paint around, making sure I've got a nice blend that I like, and then I'm just continuing to add more and more colors, mostly to that left side so everything can naturally blend. I was really liking this Indian red color, and so I kept adding that to make it look more terracotta, because we don't necessarily want the flat brown. We want to see the golds, the reds, the browns, everything within this pot. So now you can see on this pot we have our really light values, our medium values, and now we need to start adding some of our darker values in. And if you've seen my color mixing videos, you'll know that the best shadows are made by mixing complementary colors, and red and green are somewhere, like this is a reddish color, we're going to add a greenish color, and we're going to get the perfect shadowy red color. So you just want to make sure that red is the majority of the mixture, add some green in, and then we can tap that in to create a beautiful shadow color on the pot, just a little bit for now. We're also going to be painting the shadow of the leaves next to the pot while the pot is still wet, because I like when the pot colors and the shadow colors mixed and blend together. The shadow color, I'm using some Payne's Gray for a dark shadowy color, but I mixed it in with some of the green because the green would have some reflective light on the shadow. And I like that the pot color mixes into the shadow because then it looks like it has some reflective red from the pot next to it. So shadows typically have the colors next to it, reflected in it, but is still a dark shadowy color. So that's my way of creating depth within the shadows. We are going to come back to the pot once it's dry, but for now we're going to work on the leaves. So instead of coming in with the mid-tone right away, we are going to start with our lightest values of green. And sometimes, like in this instance, I add a little bit of yellow to the green to make it look brighter, because this is where the sun is hitting our bright leaves. So all the leaves to the right of our painting are going to stay this bright light color, but we can go and add this bright color to all of our leaves because most of them would have touches of this bright light hitting it from some angle. So then we can go in with darker colors and add the shadow. So that's what we're going to do now, is we can take our green that we used on the left and use that actually for our midtones and start creating the feeling of shadow and depth within our leaves. So we do this really quickly while it's still wet, and we're going to be very heavy-handed with the shadows on the left side because there is not going to be as much light able to get onto those leaves on the left. And then as we get to the right side of our painting, we're going to really focus on where we can put this paint. We don't want to put any of this medium value of color on the very right side of the leaves. That's where the light is hitting. So we're focusing all of this color on the left side of the leaves or under the leaves, or where we think a leaf might be blocking the light out from a leaf next to it. When you are adding your medium and darker values, you want to be aware of your water control. This is not the time when you have lots of water on your brush. So even though there's a lot of blending and bleeding going on and you want to maintain your maybe a medium value, feel free to tap your brush onto your paper towel anytime you feel that there is too much water. This is where you start using less and less water, and your darkest values is usually when you are using the least amount of water. My favorite way to add darkness to green is by adding blue. So I love adding indigo to my green mixture, and that is typically what I use for my darkest value of color, and a little bit goes a long way. Your midtones really provide the majority of your shadow, and then you go in with a little bit of that really dark color and it just makes the perfect contrast. Now I'm picking up the brown that I already had on my palette. I think I still had some green mixed into it because it's that really dark shadow color. And now that everything is dry, I can go in and really make some stark lines to give it some nice hard edges to the shadow. I think sometimes we are afraid of hard edges and we want to go in with water and smooth everything out. But sometimes, especially with shadow, we need the hard edge. We need a very distinct shadow. And another reason I keep paper towel close by is when I go in with some paint and it is too dark, I don't like it, you just tap it right out. So you'll see that a couple of times, especially while I'm trying to figure out how to make the edge of this pot more clear without it being dark. I still want it to be very bright and highlighted. I go in with my paper towel and I say, that's too bright, that's too dark, that's too whatever. So you can use your paper towel to take that out. You can use clean water on your brush to remove it and then use paper towel to dab it. But definitely don't be afraid to dab it anytime you think it's too much. So I've just taken really light color and kind of defined the edge on the right side so that it's not completely floating in space. That didn't feel right to me, even though I have seen that technique before and I think it's really cool. This pot just started to look like it was maybe a paper bag on that side. I felt like it needed a more defined edge, but I feel like that slight defined edge really helps. Then we just go through and continue to add more contrast to the shadows, more contrast to the leaves. This is when all of it starts to come together because everything is dry and we can add those slight details that really take everything from distinct highlighted area to dark contrasted area. When we have that really stark contrast, that's when the highlight really shines because there's a contrast. And that's when the contrast really shines because there's a highlight. And you can tell the difference from the right side to the left side because you can see the light and it makes sense to our brains. Also, as I was getting towards the end of this painting, it felt really unbalanced. There were more leaves kind of tilting to the left. So I decided to balance it out by adding more greenery on the right side of the painting. Because this side of the painting has the highlight though, I made sure to go in with really light green first, following all the rules, mid values and darker values, and I love that it added an even lighter highlighted area of green kind of on accident. And that is how to fix the number one mistake I see most beginners make, not adding enough contrast through highlight and shadow. I hope you found these techniques useful and that you will use them in your own watercolor practice, and I will see you all next time. Bye.